The OR was ready to cooler of ice sweating, monitors chirping like impatient birds, and my pager wouldn't stop. Evan Cole, 32, stared at the consent form as if ink could kill. "I'm not taking her liver," he said, voice breaking. Through the glass, two small boys pressed their hands to the window. To understand why he refused, we have to go back. By the time I reached the transplant floor at St. Alder Medical Center, the hallway smelled like bleach and burnt coffee, the kind that has been sitting on a warmer long enough to turn bitter and metallic. The fluorescent lights didn't flatter anyone. They made every face look slightly haunted, like the building itself had been awake for days. A gurney rolled past with a squeaking wheel that nobody had time to fix, and the sound stitched itself into the steady rhythm of beeps coming from behind closed doors. Tonight's schedule was tight, unforgiving, and already slipping. Evan Cole was in the pre-op bay, wearing a paper gown that never quite covers the dignity it steals. He wasn't a dramatic man. You could tell by how hard he worked to keep his hands still, fingers folded, knuckles pully as if movement might invite panic into the room. 2 plastic superhero stickers clung to his four-pole, placed there with the solemn care only children have, and the sight of them hit me harder than any lab result ever could. I'd read his chart, yes, but the chart didn't include the way he watched the doorway like he was waiting for bad news to grow legs and walk in. His boys were on the other side of the glass. Too young to understand major surgery, old enough to understand that something was stealing their father's color. One of them kept pressing his palm to the window and lifting it, pressing and lifting, like he could pump courage into the room through touch alone. Their mother, Evan's ex, I'd been told, stood behind them with her arms folded tight across her chest. A posture that wasn't anger so much as a brace against collapse. When I introduced myself, she nodded without looking at me, eyes fixed on Evan, as if the moment she looked away the world might take him. The transplant coordinator, Denise, met me at the foot of Evan's bed with a clipboard and a voice that had learned how to stay calm in storms. She spoke quietly, but the words carried. The donor had arrived hours earlier. The last evaluations were complete. The surgical team was scrubbed and waiting. Everything we could control had been controlled, and what we couldn't control was time. Time ticking away in the cooler downstairs. Ticking away in the fragile window where hope stays usable. Evan listened like a man hearing instructions for someone else's life, nodding at the wrong moments, swallowing hard. I pulled a stool close, so I wasn't looming over him, so my voice didn't come from the ceiling like judgment. I explained, in plain words, what we were about to do and why it mattered. How sometimes the body reaches a point where medicine becomes a bridge and surgery is the only way across. I asked him about pain, about sleep, about what he wanted me to tell his kids if the worst happened, because the worst always lives in the room, even when nobody says its name. He tried to answer, but his gaze kept drifting to the door, searching for something he couldn't ask for out loud. It was Denise who hesitated, just a fraction, the kind of hesitation that sets off alarms in people like me. She turned a page on her clipboard, then turned it back, as if paper could be negotiated with. "Evan," she said gently, "before we finalize consent, there's something you need to know about the donor." The room went too quiet. The beeping suddenly loud enough to feel like it was inside my teeth. Evan's eyes flicked to mine, not pleading yet, just bracing. Denise took a breath that sounded like a prayer breaking. "The donor is your sister," she said. And it landed with the weight of a history nobody in the room had lived, but all of us could suddenly feel. Marin Gray, Denise added, because names make truths impossible to dodge. Evan didn't speak at first. His face did something small and devastating, as if a door inside him had swung open to a place he had boarded up years ago. Then his mouth moved and no sound came, and when sound finally did, it wasn't anger, it was terror, stripped clean. The first words he managed were not about himself at all, but about her. No, not her. The moment Denise said my sister's name, The air in Evans Bay changed temperature, like someone had opened a door to winter. He sat up to fast, the gown sliding off one shoulder, eyes wild, not the anger I was trained to manage, but the kind of fear that doesn't care about logic. His fingers found the edge of the bed and locked there, white-knuckled, as if he had to hold himself in the room. "No," he repeated, softer now, like he was trying to convince a memory instead of us. I stepped closer and lowered my voice, the way you speak to someone standing near a ledge. "Evan, nobody is forcing you," I said, and I meant it even if time was already tightening around our throats. The monitors kept singing their thin, steady song, indifferent to family history. Denise was still holding the clipboard, but it looked suddenly useless paper trying to police a wound. Through the glass, his boys were still there, their small faces pressed close, their breath fogging the window in little halos. He shook his head, fast and sharp, like he could shake the truth loose. "She has kids," he said. "She has a whole life." He stopped, throat bobbing, the rest of the sentence trapped behind something old and heavy. The ex-wife Clara appeared in the doorway then, drawn by the tension the way smoke draws people out of sleep. She took one look at Evan's face, and her posture changed. Her arms unfolded, then folded again tighter, like she was trying to keep herself from breaking in half. Denise's phone buzzed and she flinched. A message from the donor side of the floor. From the team that had been preparing Marin. Questions about timing. About whether we were proceeding. About how long they should keep her fasting, waiting, scared. We hadn't even brought Marin into the same airspace as Evan yet, and already she was everywhere in his expression. Evan stared past me toward the hallway, as if he could see her there, 32 years old, younger sister, the kind of person you protect by instinct even when you've lost the right. "Let me talk to her," he said suddenly, and I saw how desperate the request was, how it tried to be control. "I'll tell her no." "You can't." His voice cracked on the word can't, and his hand finally left the bed to press flat to his chest. Not dramatic, just a human trying to hold his own body together. His lips were dry, the kind of dry that comes from hours of nausea and fear and not enough saliva left to pretend you're fine. Then the numbers on the monitor began to slide the wrong way. Not a cliff, but a slope that makes your stomach drop because you know where it leads. His skin took on that gray, waxy cast I hate seeing on young fathers. A nurse leaned in and spoke softly, checking him, adjusting. Eyes flicking up at me with the question she didn't ask out loud, "Do we have time for this conversation?" Evan's gaze unfocused for a second, like the room had dimmed around the edges, and he swallowed hard as if fighting back something sour. He turned his head toward the trash bin and retched nothing much came up. Just thin bile and the kind of strain that makes a person tremble afterward. When he lifted his face again, there was a smear of blood at the corner of his mouth, bright against the pale. Clara made a small sound, the kind of sound a parent makes when they realize they might have to explain death to a child. Evan wiped his lips with the back of his hand and looked at me, pleading now, finally pleading. "If she gets hurt," he whispered, "and her kids grow up without her, that's on me." The overhead speaker crackled with a voice, calling for the transplant team to confirm the start time. Somewhere down the hall, an elevator chimed and the doors opened with a sigh, as if the building itself was impatient. Denise's eyes glistened, but she held steady. She had seen enough miracles and enough regrets to know they can look identical at the beginning. I watched Evan's boys press their palms to the glass again, still believing in simple things like Dad's coming home. And I felt the cruel math of it, a window of saving him narrowing. And a sister offering herself like a bridge he was terrified to step on. I'm Denise, the transplant coordinator, and my job is usually to turn chaos into a checklist without letting anyone see my hands shake. In Evan Cole's Bay, the checklist turned to ash. The air tasted like antiseptic and old fear, and the monitor's steady chirps sounded less like reassurance and more like a countdown. He kept repeating the same idea, with different words, as if changing the phrasing could change reality. He would rather risk his own life than gamble with his sister's. I've heard refusal before, but this one carried a kind of childhood in it. People think a transplant is a single decision, a signature, a gurney rolling toward bright lights. It's not. It is two human beings making two separate choices. Under pressure that doesn't stop just because someone is breaking apart. The law and our policies are plain. Evan can refuse, even if refusal is foolish, even if it hurts to watch. Marin, the donor, has her own consent process too, guarded fiercely by an independent advocate whose only job is to protect her from guilt, coercion, and family gravity that pulls harder than reason. I stepped into the donor wing and found Marin Grace sitting upright on a bed. Hair braided tight like she'd done it for court, not surgery. She looked smaller than I expected, but there was steel in the way she held her shoulders. She wasn't crying. She was too focused for that, eyes fixed on a point above the nurse's head as if she'd pinned her courage there. When I told her Evan knew, her throat moved once, a swallow that didn't fully go down, and then she said, "Of course he's scared. He always was, even when he pregnant. He wasn't der donadicate. Simone. Ask the questions we are required to ask, but also the ones we should ask even if nobody required them. Did anyone threaten her, pressure her, imply she owed this? Was she doing it to win forgiveness, to erase something, to prove she was still worth saving?" Marin's answer came out steady, but her fingers betrayed her, twisting the hospital blanket until it creased. "He protected me when nobody else did," she said. "He took the hits that were meant for me. He lost things he never talks about. This is my turn." She paused, eyes shining without spilling, and added, "And I have kids. That's why I'm doing it. I want them to grow up in a family that knows how to show up." Back in Evans Bay, Clara had pulled the boys into the waiting room, trying to keep them from seeing their father unravel. The waiting room was its own kind of ICU, vending machine hum. A muted TV no one watched, the smell of fast food clinging to coats. Evan stared at the floor, like it might open and swallow the decision for him. He told me, quietly, that Marin had disappeared from his life after he got them both out. That he'd built a world where he didn't have to think about the house they came from. "If she dies because of me," he said, voice thinning, "then I didn't save her. I just delayed it." The surgeon in me wanted to argue with statistics, to talk about how donors are screened, how we plan, how we watch them like hawks, and how the liver is one of the few organs that can regenerate. But the human in me watched the way Evan's eyes kept darting toward the hallway, the way his breath snagged every time his phone lit up with another missed call from a number he hadn't saved. This wasn't a math problem. It was a story that had been bleeding for years. And now, it was bleeding in real time with an operating room waiting and a clock that doesn't care about trauma. We convened an emergency ethics huddle in a small conference room that smelled like dry marker and hand sanitizer. The kind of room where people try to solve impossible things with calm voices. The attending surgeon, the anesthesiologist, Simone the donor advocate, a social worker, and me. The conclusion was the same one we always reach, because it's the only conclusion that protects the living. No one can be pushed onto that table. Not Evan, not Marin. Consent has to be clean, not scraped together from guilt and old vows made in a childhood nobody should have lived. And still, when we stepped back into the hallway, we all heard the same sound in our heads, the quiet, relentless ticking of time running out. "I'm Riley Chun. I see you, nurse." And I've learned that the loudest emergencies aren't always the ones that come with sirens. Sometimes they come as a man in a paper gown whispering no like it's a prayer. While the clock keeps moving like it is somewhere better to be, Evan's color kept draining in slow motion, not dramatic enough to justify panic to an outsider, but enough to make my skin prickle with the certainty that we were running out of margins. The monitor's beeps stayed polite, yet Every few minutes the numbers nudged in the wrong direction, and I could feel the room tightening around him. In the waiting area, his two boys sat with their feet dangling above the floor. Swinging in nervous sync, eyes darting between the vending machines and the hallway that kept swallowing adults. Clara tried to speak softly, but grief has a way of turning whispers into knives, and every sentence sounded like a dare against fate. "He can't leave them," she said, not to anyone in particular, not even to God, just to the air. Evan heard it anyway, because guilt travels through walls like smoke, and his face twisted as if she'd pressé da bruise. When I went back in, he was half sitting, half folded, breathing through his mouth, like the room didn't have enough oxygen to feed fear and a failing body at the same time. He kept asking the same question, different words each time. What if Maren doesn't wake up? What if she can't go home? What if her kids remember the day their mom walked into a hospital and never came back? He wasn't bargaining for his life. He was bargaining for hers, as if protecting her was the only thing that still made him feel like himself. I checked his four, adjusted what I could, and watched the way his eyes glazed for a second before snapping back, like a light flickering in a storm. Denise appeared again, clipboard abandoned somewhere, her hands empty now because this was beyond paperwork. "Maren is asking to see him," she said, voice tight, and I felt the whole hallway lean in. Simone, the donor advocate, stood beside her with the kind of calm that only comes from understanding the ways families can twist consent into obligation. A brief conversation, Simone clarified, with staff present. And Evan can end it at any time. Evan's jaw clenched as if the very idea of seeing Maren would make him responsible for whatever happened next. And then he nodded once, sharp, like ripping off a bandage. They brought Maren in wearing her own gown, hair still braided. Eyes bright with something that looked like courage, until you stood close enough to see the tremble underneath. For a second, neither of them spoke, and the silence carried more history than any file we had. Evan stared at her like she was a ghost that had learned to breathe. "You have children," he managed, the words scraped thin. Maren stepped closer, but not too close, like she respected the invisible line of his fear. "So do you," she said, and her voice didn't accuse him. It anchored him. "I can't take this from you," Evan whispered, and the way he said take made it sound like theft, like he'd be stealing her future with his bare hands. Maren's eyes filled, but she held them steady. "You didn't take anything when you got us out," she said. "You paid for it. You paid for it with your school, with your friends, with years you never got back." Evan flinched, like she'd touched a scar nobody else was allowed to see. "I'm not doing this because I owe you," she added, voice softening into something almost tender. "I'm doing it because I'm still here. Because you made sure I stayed here long enough to become someone who can choose." Evan shook his head, and his breath hitched, and I saw the moment the argument ran out and raw truth walked in. "If you die," he said, "I won't survive it, even if I'm alive." Maren's face tightened, not with anger but with the fatigue of carrying her own fear quietly. "Then don't make this a story where one of us has to be the martyr," she said. "I'm scared too. I have kids too. But I also have a plan, and people, and a life that isn't balanced on one thread anymore." She paused, swallowing, and her eyes flicked toward the glass where Evan's boys had been earlier, as if she could see them through memory. "Let me protect you once," she whispered. "Not because you're weak. Because you're human." When Evan finally reached for the consent form, his hand shook so hard I thought he might tear the paper. He didn't sign like a hero. He signed like a man stepping into fire, because someone he loves is already burning. I watched his pen scratch across the line, and I felt the room exhale in a way that sounded like relief and grief tangled together. Denise moved first, voice crisp now, calling the OR, calling transport, turning our fragile decision into motion. Maren squeezed Evan's fingers once brief. Reverend Tan, then the team, began to separate them, each pulled toward a different door, each carrying a piece of the same impossible love. I'm Dr. Julian Hart, anesthesiologist. And there's a particular quiet that settles over an operating room right before everything becomes irreversible. It isn't peace. It's focus sharpened until it feels like cold air in your lungs. The lights bloomed overhead like a second sun, turning skin to porcelain and making every drop of sweat look like confession. Someone turned up the heat to keep bodies warm. But my hands still felt chilled as I checked lines, watched breathing, listened to the steady chorus of machines that never sleep and never forgive distraction. Marin came in first, eyes open, face pale, braid tucked under a cap like she was hiding her bravery for safekeeping. I introduced myself, because names matter when you're about to ask a person to trust you with their pain. She tried to answer, but her voice caught, and she nodded instead, blinking fast. "My kids," she whispered, and I leaned close so she wouldn't have to spend strength on volume. "They're waiting," I told her. "And we're going to do everything we can to get you back to them." It wasn't a promise I could guarantee, but it was a truth about intent, and sometimes intent is the only honesty medicine can offer. Down the hall, Evan's room was being emptied of anything that could remind him he was still a father, and not just a patient. The superhero stickers on his 4-pole traveled with him, stubborn as hope. When he rolled into the OR, he looked smaller than he had in the bay, swallowed by drapes and lights, and the weight of what he'd just agreed to. His eyes found mine for a second, glassy but present. "Please," he said, and the word held Marin's name without speaking it. And not at once because we're way. The surgery began as surgeries always do, calm voices, measured movements, the illusion of control built on years of practice. But beneath that calm, time pulsed like a second heartbeat. I watched blood pressure, watched oxygen, watched the subtle shifts that tell you a body is tolerating stress or slipping away from you. In one room, we were helping Marin give. In another, we were trying to keep Evan alive long enough to receive. The building felt like it was holding its breath with us, hallway doors closing softly as if noise might jinx the outcome. Then the curve of the night bent, as it always does, toward the part you can't rehearse. Marin's body reacted with a fierceness that reminded me how brave flesh has to be to survive being opened and repaired. A few numbers drifted, a few minutes became sharp, and the surgeon's voice shifted from conversational to precise. We corrected, adjusted, stayed steady. That's the work meeting complication without flinching, not because we're fearless, but because fear wastes time. In the other room, Evan's vitals wavered in sympathy, like siblings still tethered by something deeper than blood. Hours passed in Estranged, stretched or what, where you can tell if you've been standing for 10 minutes or 10 years. I watched hands move with practice choreography, watched suction tubes fill and empty, watched the surgical field change from struggle back to something like order. When the team finally announced they were closing on Marin, my shoulders dropped a fraction, and I realized I'd been holding myself tight as a wire. We transferred her to a bed, wrapped in warm blankets, her face slack with sleep that wasn't natural but was necessary. As she left the room, I caught a glimpse of her braid's end peeking out, and the sight hit me like tenderness. Evan came next, and the room felt heavier, because receiving is not passive. It's surrender under fluorescent lights. His body fought, then steadied, then fought again, like a man trying to decide whether he deserved the help he'd finally accepted. When the surgeon said, "We have flow," relief didn't arrive as joy. It arrived as exhaustion, thick and immediate, like wet cement in the limbs. We moved him toward the ICU, tubes and wires trailing like the roots of a tree that had been uprooted and replanted. In the hallway, Clara stood with the boys, eyes red, hands shaking. And when I told her they were both alive, her knees buckled with the kind of gratitude that looks almost like pain. In the ICU that night, there was no celebration, only vigilance. Evan slept under a web of sensors, face still, mouth slightly open, as if he'd been running for years and finally stopped. In the next bay, Marin lay pale but breathing, her chest rising with the stubborn rhythm of a mother who still had more bedtime stories to tell. Denise stood between their rooms like a bridge, phone pressed to her ear, quietly updating to sets of grandparents who had once failed them both. And in the dim light of the nurse's station, I understood something I rarely admit. Medicine can save a life, but it can't undo the years that made saving necessary. I'm back on service 2 days later, and the hospital feels like it always does after a major case too ordinary for what it just held. The floors shine, the elevators ding, the coffee tastes burnt, and people laugh in the cafeteria like the world didn't almost break apart on the 6th floor. That normalcy used to comfort me, now it unsettles me. It reminds me that trauma doesn't stop the schedule, and survival doesn't come with a parade. It comes with soreness, with fear returning in quiet waves, with the slow work of learning how to live again. Evan wakes up in pieces, not all at once. First his eyes open, unfocused, then his gaze finds the ceiling, then his hand searches the air like he's trying to remember where he is by touch. When his boys come in, they move cautiously, like the beeping machines might bite. Evan tries to smile, and it looks painful, not because of stitches alone, but because he's realizing he got to see them again, and that kind of relief can feel unbearable. He whispers their names, and the older one says, "And Marin is here," like it's the most normal thing in the world, like families don't fracture and vanish. Marin's recovery is not a victory lap. She is awake, yes, but pale, eyes shadowed, a hand pressed to her side when she laughs, as if laughter costs too much. When Evan asks if she's okay, she doesn't give him the easy lie. "I'm hurting," she admits, voice rough, and then she adds, "But I'm here." Evan turns his face away, not to hide tears from her, but to hide them from himself. Because men like him were trained early that crying didn't stop what was coming. Marin reaches for his fingers anyway, and this time he lets her hold on without trying to pay for it. Clara stays, even though she doesn't have to. She sits in the chair by Evan's bed with her shoes off, knees pulled up, looking more like a tired girl than an ex-wife. When Marin is wheeled in for a brief visit, Clara stands as if bracing for impact. The two women study each other, two mothers, two lives that have carried Evan's weight in different ways, and the room fills with the kind of tension that used to be anger, but has aged into something quieter. Clara clears her throat and says, "Thank you," and the words come out uneven, as if gratitude is a language she hasn't practiced. Marin nods once, eyes shining, and answers, "Take care of him when I can't be here." Not possessive, just honest about how love works when it's grown up. The hardest moment is not medical. It's Evan asking, in a voice that sounds too small for his body, "Why didn't you tell me you were there?" Marin's mouth trembles, and for a second she looks like the younger sister again, cornered by a memory. "Because you would have run," she says. "You would have tried to save me again, and you were already bleeding out inside your own life." Evan inhales sharply, and I can see him replaying years in his head, all the times he confused sacrifice with safety. He whispers, "I'm sorry," and Marin answers, "I'm not giving you forgiveness. I'm giving you family," like it's a decision she's making with clear eyes. When I leave their room, I pause by the window at the end of the corridor. The city outside looks indifferent, headlights threading through the dark. People going home to arguments and dinners and television, unaware of the two siblings upstairs who just rewrote each other's futures with pain and courage. I think about how many patients refuse care because they cannot bear to be the reason someone else suffers, and how noble it looks from a distance until you see the children in the waiting room. Love can be a shield, yes, but it can also be a cage, built out of good intentions and old terror. Evan didn't accept the transplant because he suddenly stopped being afraid. He accepted it because he finally understood that receiving help is not stealing, and letting someone choose you back is not cruelty. Marin didn't donate because she wanted to erase the past. She donated because she refused to let the past be the only story they had. The scar they carry now is not just on skin, but in the way their eyes meet, less guarded, more honest. As if the hospital stripped them down to the truth and left them no choice but to keep it. If you're listening and you've ever tried to disappear so the people you love won't worry, hear this. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay, even when staying means letting others step forward and hold you.